All right, folks, it's time to talk about Mars's retrograde in Gemini. It may have been time a while ago, but it certainly is time now. The planet Mars typically spends about 45 days in one sign, and if you use whole signs, WHOLE, to read charts like I do, and I do not want to get into a discussion about house systems. People get entirely too worked up about them. Read the charts as they resonate with you, and if you read 1,000, 2,000 charts, that you will start to interpret them a certain way if you use the same system. Whole signs Western tropical zodiac works for me. I find it right now the most accurate. I keep experimenting with sidereal astrology, and I'm waiting to. On the rational side of me keeps wanting to believe that that's got to be the right way, and we'll see. We keep developing. We keep working in whatever it is that we do. So, but when Mars goes retrograde every couple of years, it ends up spending almost 5 to 6 months in the same sign, and it's a significant transit. And it's probably happening for a reason, because during this retrograde, Mars makes 2 sets of important transits. And there's a narrative that builds in with all sorts of planetary transits that have been happening. When we had the first Mercury retrograde of the year, I think in February, Jan-Feb, the retrograde Mercury met up with the Sun, I think in 0 degrees of Gemini, because Mars is retrograde in Gemini. If I didn't say that, I apologize. So it's spending an unusually long time in the sign of Gemini. So Mars is in the part of the chart that is occupied by Gemini in your chart, the house that it occupies and what that house stands for. Let me start here. When a planet goes retrograde, when Mercury goes retrograde, we're required to rethink or reprocess. The universe gives us more information that was in our blind spot. So whether we like it or not, we're forced not only to we're forced to throw a wrench in our plans, because some part of our plans are built on shaky foundations. Not all of them, some part of them. It's a little bit like having, for those of you who've done corporate work, having a project plan in place, and to the best of your ability, you were moving forward, and then all of a sudden something else emerges. It's just like, okay, what is this? And what does this mean? And things have to be taken into account. Mercury governs the mind, speech, the mind. Things have to be reprocessed. Information, as the planet goes retrograde, as it reverses, it goes, let's just say that it goes back to retrieve more information and make it more apparent, bring it up to the surface. When Venus goes retrograde, we are forced to revalue our relationships and our finances. Venus retrogrades are notorious for bringing in a short period of scarcity, so that you're forced to think about where it is that your money is going and what's going on with your relationships and the relationship between the two. And are you serving your expenditure, or is your expenditure serving you? For example, in very, very tangible terms. When Mars, the planet of action, Mars, the male planet, hunter-gatherer, the pursuit of goals and ambitions and desires, very important word for Mars, and conflict, the setting up of boundaries, typically in the process of pursuing desires, because that's when you come in clash with others, whether it's competitively. Mars, with the male spirit, sports, athletics, warfare, battles, anything that is fueled by testosterone, and the pursuit of our careers, in a certain way, the completion of tasks, the achievement of activities, putting muscle behind something, putting testosterone behind something. Venus is a receptacle. Venus sits and the grass grows and the trees bear fruit, and Venus leans into the tempo and the action of the universe. Venus is a non-active planet. Venus bestows bounty. Mars is the active planet. Mars does. Mars does not wait for the universe. It fulfills a very important function. If we were just waiting for, you would, at some point you got to build your house, and you've got to build the fire, and you got to go get the food, and you got to build the boundary wall, and you got to blah blah blah, and you got to pull out the bows and arrows sometimes too. When Mars is retrograde, I don't find that it's a reevaluation of goals, I have to tell you. I do find that it's a dropping of arms. The edge is taken off. It's a regrouping. Where a certain kind of male energy has really built up, worked up, it's difficult to explain. Where it's like when the pressure cooker, it's not even a releasing of steam. It's almost like when you're in the middle of some sort of a battle or a war, at some point, whether for a long duration, you've got to call a timeout to kind of drop the and just re-strategize. It's not the right word, but it is the right word. Because when you act, it's got to sit on something. And rather than the energies becoming... The downside of Mars retrograde is that we might feel that our vitality is not quite there. And this will be true for some of us. We feel lazier, we feel it harder to get things done. But it depends on Mars's placement in your chart and how you react to Mars. If you have a very strong Mars, you might actually appreciate Mars going retrograde, because it might be that you are just generally a hyperactive or a hyper Martian, hyper-testosterone person. Quick to react, quick to anger, quick to... and in that regard, a retrograde Mars might be really useful. This transit might be useful because there's a kind of a cool your jets quality. That's probably, but in the process of cooling your jets, there's room for inquiry, there's room for considered action, there's room for just worth thinking. And this is how I would... When we looked at the Mercury retrograde in January, February, I said that Mars would be going retrograde in Gemini later in the year. And this is when a lot of battles will get fought. And this energy goes into March and even into April. What do I mean by that? I mean that, and I'd also mentioned that some of the people associated with the sign of Gemini in your chart are going to be helpful and necessary and instrumental even in helping you make progress with the Taurus eclipses. Because that Mercury retrograde went into Taurus, back to Gemini. There was a tying together of Taurus and Gemini, and the pursuit of goals in the Taurus part of your chart somehow being aided by or dependent on some of the people who were in the Gemini part of your chart. At the same token, at the same time, there could be similar, the same, or different, likely different. This is what makes sense to me at least, but it will vary. I'm not reading your personal chart. Set of people associated with where the sign of Gemini sits in your chart who might be active in some of the gaslighting and loss associated with the Pisces part of your chart. Mars, in its retrograde, trines Saturn in Aquarius 3 times and squares Neptune in Pisces 3 times. Mars entered Gemini on August 20th, went retrograde on October 20th, and part of the reason why I think it's important to do this video now is Mars squared Neptune first on October the 12th, about a month ago, and is getting ready as a retrograde Mars to square Neptune again on November the 19th. And it's very possible that the squaring of Neptune and Pisces is creating this Mars retrograde unease. This, do I need to draw boundaries? Do I need to take action? Do I need to take up arms against this Pisces part of my chart where there could potentially be loss or thievery or gaslighting or smoke and mirrors or lack of clarity? And all I can tell you is I think it behooves you, if that's how you're feeling, to pay attention to it. I can't tell you what is going on with your chart, when to take action, and all that kind of stuff. Mars goes direct then on January the 12th. And Mars squares Neptune for the final time as part of this retrograde from Gemini on March the 14th. Now it's interesting, by the time Mars trines Saturn on September 28th, it's going to trine Saturn again on November 28th, and then it's going to trine Saturn, but by this time Mars will be in Cancer and Saturn in Pisces. Fascinating. On March the 30th. So some of this retrograde activity and the building of things, what is the relationship? This has come up time and time again since last year. What is the relationship between the Aquarius part of your chart and the Taurus part of your chart? How do the two need to be accommodated? It's like these two signs at a stoplight, and, you know, especially the Taurus part of your chart is dependent on some of the activities and actions that need to be taken in the Aquarius part of your chart. And the last video I did just before this, meditating on the eclipses that have just gotten done, talks a lot about taking the Aquarius part of your chart responsibly and seriously. And some part of this, there's this constructive element when you look at the Mars-Saturn trines, September 28th, November 20th, March 30th, where a group of people or situations associated with the Gemini part of the chart supports the Aquarius part of your chart, and through that, the Taurus eclipses. At the same time, there's been some activity that's been brewing from the Gemini part of your chart that is at odds with the Pisces part of your chart, somehow contributing. Is there an energy leak? Do people associated with the Gemini part of your chart have some sort of a role to play in this kind of loss or unease in the Pisces part of your chart? And Mars's retrograde and then direct must mean that we're being called upon to deal with this by taking action. And it's up to you to determine how to use this Mars retrograde energy. Clearly, it's not time to go into battle. But how do you decide if you need to go into battle or not? Clearly, it may not be time yet to fully avail of the Gemini portion of your chart and the people associated with it to build the Aquarius part of your chart and the Taurus part of the chart. But how can you start to find support in the Gemini part of your chart to support the Taurus eclipses in the Aquarius part of your chart? And these retrograde energies that take us now till the end of November and into December the 12th. December, when is Mars going direct again? January the 12th, but especially early December. Here's the thing. Here's the interesting thing. Talking about the Mars retrograde and what it might mean. Not only are these two big transits part of this Mars retrograde, we're also entering a period. We had the Taurus eclipse. The next new moon is on November the 23rd. It's in Sagittarius. Great. The next full moon is on December the 7th. The full moon is in Gemini. And guess what? It is conjunct a retrograde Mars. So when we looked at to that December 7th date, you're going to have a full moon and a full Mars. Mars will be illuminated, retrograde in Gemini. There will be room for greater clarity as you head to that full Mars on December the 7th and 8th. In the meantime, Venus just entered Sagittarius yesterday. Mercury's entering Sagittarius today. The Sun will enter Sagittarius on the 22nd. And from there, these three planets will also oppose Mars. Personal planets, shorter-term transits. Mercury opposes Mars on November the 29th. One day after Mars trines Saturn. Venus opposes Mars on December the 1st. December the 7th, we have the Gemini full moon. conjunct Mars, and on the 8th we have the full Mars with the Sun opposite Mars. The reason why I'm doing the Mars retrograde video now is if you are feeling both the need to investigate, not the right word, cool your, but strategize, explore. Is there a fight? Is there not a fight? Do I need to defend myself? Do I need to draw boundaries? How do I evaluate what chess moves? What moves? Certainly unease as we Mars squares Neptune. I would strongly, if you're starting to, it's the 16th, if you're starting to feel that unease and Mars retrograde is coming knocking on your heart going, remember the link between the Gemini part of your chart and the Pisces part of your chart and the haziness around it, and maybe it's time to put that post-it on the wall right in front of you so you can stare at it and figure out what you need to do with it and how you want to proceed and how you want to see where you're going to end up being by January the 12th, so that once Mars goes direct and then squares Neptune again on March the 14th, you know what you're doing in the first quarter. And remember, on March the 7th, Saturn enters Pisces, and for 2.5 years, and the Pisces part of your chart needs to be taken seriously, and it could be time for consequence. This is what I meant by the second half of this year has this kind of battleground feeling. A lot of things that have been developing. In the sign of Pisces, remember there were the eclipses of loss or release, 2014, 15, 16. We had Mercury retrograde there for a period of time. Everything is sort of culminating towards the Saturn transit in Pisces over the next 2 or 3 years. The sign of Pisces and where it sits in your chart has been very active, very disturbed, very agitated, very much a place, arguably, of loss. Now, if you are pursuing a highly spiritual career or giving everything up and going into the Himalayas or pursuing an artistic career, it could be that it's opening you up to inspiration, spiritual inspiration, renunciatory inspiration, monastic inspiration, artistic and creative inspiration. But leaving that aside, there's also with Neptune undeniably this question of leak and loss. Something is just not meant to be yours. And it never was. And most things never are. Because you don't really belong to things. And Neptune creates this unease while we're in this 3D reality, and you have a planet like Saturn saying, pay attention to the material world and your achievements and how you navigate through life. Neptune comes in and puts this thing here going, but ultimately you don't belong here anyway. And nothing and nobody is yours anyway. But it's an uneasy feeling because it's not really all that compatible with what we're trying to do and achieve on a day-to-day basis. Planets like Mars and Saturn being trine are very achievement-oriented. It's very interesting. Taking up arms against the Pisces side of your chart and constructing something around the Saturn and Taurus part of your chart is the theme with this Mars retrograde. And these personal planet transits that take us into the Gemini full moon and a little bit beyond will provide more information and more details. Whether you wait, whether you don't wait, when you act, when you don't act, what an act is, what an act isn't, I can't tell you that. This is going to be specific to your situation and where you need to get professional help. Lawyers, law enforcement, whatever it is that you need to do, you've got to figure out when it is that you do that if we're talking about battles here. Or therapists, or your own battles, or your own boundaries, or when you communicate, or when, those are things. But with Mars retrograde, there's certainly, let's assume that as much as we hate retrograde planets, that they are serving a purpose. And Mars retrograde is serving, there's a need to re-strategize, re-look at why you are fighting, what you are fighting for, what you are building, why you're building it. It could very much be that during this Mars retrograde, you discover all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm not operating the old way anymore. That could be very much, that's a good way of describing it. I'm going to operate in a new way. I'm going to pursue my goals and defend my boundaries in a new way. And this Mars retrograde may very well be the time that gives you the space and the determination, while the edge is off, to regroup and determine what this new way is, so that once Mars goes direct, even before, perhaps, because these trines and these squares may not be preparatory time, may still involve some action. I don't think it's a time of just observing. But you've got to determine what those actions are when Mars is retrograde and when Mars is direct. When you are it's a re-strategizing. It's a going back to the drawing board with regard to what your actions need to be, whether they're the pursuit of goals or the creation of boundaries and the protection of what you feel is yours or the protection of what you value. By the time the planets move, planets between the sun and the earth, we are much more tied to. But when it comes to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, progressively, it's a different energy. It's a different way of relating to planets. I'm already at the 20-minute mark. I don't want to keep gabbing on. I'm going to leave it at that so that you can really think about the Gemini part of your chart, the relationship between how it could support the Taurus and Aquarius part of your chart, what the relationship or the thread is between the Gemini and the Pisces part of your chart. And I would encourage you over the next couple of weeks to be in a place of active exploration and appropriate action around preparing a set of activities that may take you into March of next year. But if somewhere you need to get clear on what your goals need to be with these parts of your chart and what you need to fight and defend and how you need to pursue your goals, enjoy and lean into the Mars retrograde, the need to drop the defensive so that you can figure out when you take up arms again, so that you can have a better, so that you're not operating the same way again. So that you're clearer, more targeted, more efficient, and the foundations and the things that you're fighting for or building are more solidly, are on a stronger foundation based on everything you have learned. All right, I will leave it at that. If you found this useful, feel free to share, comment, like, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click on the bell icon above the subscribe button, the wiggly one, so that you're notified when I do new videos. And we'll continue this journey together. Thank you.